Hey, I'm Sarah Smith, family doctor, clinical day advisor, and the chatting coach. Welcome back to Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast, where we're going to be interviewing peers or world experts who can help us think about our clinical day in a way that is more sustainable and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today we have with us Dr. Andrew Wilner. I'm excited to talk to him about all the fun things about locuming. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's hear a bit about you, your background, your journey through medicine. What sort of things can we learn from you?
Well, as you can see, I got a lot of great hair, so it's a long story, but I'm board certified in internal medicine, board certified in neurology, and fellowship trained in epilepsy. That was kind of a long story, but it was actually a locums assignment way back when I did my medical internship because I thought I wanted to be an internal medicine doctor. But I also knew I wanted to be a writer. That's an interest I've had since I was 13, and I wrote poems and short stories and plays, and I knew that's something I wanted to do. So my internship, my medical internship was very grueling and fascinating, but at the end of it, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I had a book in mind, and so I thought I'll just take a break from my training and I'll go back and finish my internal medicine, but I'll take a year and I'll write a book. I had a book in my head. And I hadn't been able to do any writing as an intern. I decided I would just put that on hold so I could survive my internship, and that worked fine. So I took a job in an ER, which was really basically a locum tenens job. It was a per diem job. I worked 3 12-hour shifts a week. This was 1982. I had no ER training. And in those days, there weren't ER doctors. Any doctor, you could be a pathologist and you could work in the ER. That's the way it was set up. And I had 1 year of internship at the Long Beach Veterans Hospital under my belt. And a lot of the guys did moonlighting there, the senior resident. So they hired me. And I saw everything in the ER. I delivered babies, I sutured, I took foreign bodies out of eyes, and it was hard. And I had a lot of books and made a lot of phone calls for help. But what I discovered was the neurologic cases were fascinating to me. Patients that came in with double vision, or one side of the body was numb, or severe headaches. That was really interesting to me. And so I went back and did my internal medicine, and I applied for neurology program. I ended up doing neurology in Canada at the Montreal Neurologic Institute and stayed on for a fellowship. But that opportunity to work in the ER, in addition to letting me write my book, it gave me a broader exposure to medicine now that I was trained, and really made a big difference in my life. So I think that was the first time that a locums kind of situation really guided my career, as well as funded me so that I could, because I had no outside funding, so that I could take time off and write my book.
Yeah. So this what sounds like a different situation than now, because I'm seeing a lot of medical students having to do their placement, get matched, and then go straight into their field of interest for the rest of their lives. The internship model has really dropped away. Is that correct? Am I correct
Yes,
from
in
a
fact,
US point of view?
to jump ahead about 40 years, I'm now a professor of neurology at the
Hmm.
University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis. And so I have medical students and I have residents. And I've noticed that the residents start their internship year with us, and they call themselves a year one neurology resident, but they're really not. They're a year one internal medicine, and it's a mixed thing. And then at year two, they start their official neurology residency. Yeah, that model, it has changed. I think it still exists. But in my day, a lot of people would do an internship and then sort of make their decision. I think the students are being forced to decide earlier and earlier, which I think is not easy and probably not wise from a system point of view, because you're not mature yet and you haven't seen everything. and you're kind of locked in. If you decide you're going to be a neurosurgeon, well, that's a long story, and you don't want to be in year 6 of that and say, I really should have picked ophthalmology. That
Yeah.
puts the students in an awkward situation. So I would encourage, students at that level to, be as broad as possible,
Mm.
before they have to make a big decision. If they do have second thoughts when they start their residency, bail out sooner rather than later because the clock is ticking.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about that emergency department. You've got 1 year under your belt of doing some supported learning internship year, which is what I would hope most internship years are, is where you really have a lot of people around you to help make you those decisions. And then you're in the emergency department doing 12-hour shifts. I heard a lot of clinical courage there. I'm doing things I've never done before. I'm seeing things. I'm trying to figure it out. I've got books. I've got people I can call, but really it's me on the front line doing the things. Do you think that set you up for future locuming? Is that a skill
Oh,
set that
oh yeah, I think some of that was some brashness that I probably shouldn't have had. But yeah, I did it, and I had a little satchel. I don't know if they still have it, but they had something called the Washington Manual, for ophthalmology, and the Washington Manual for orthopedics, because I would set, broken bones. And I wasn't shy to call it. First question, do you have a doctor? And they say, oh yeah, I see doctor. In those days, people tended to have family doctors. So I would say, I'd pick up the phone. Hey, your patient's here. They got a rash all over their body. What do you think I ought to do? But by the end of the year, it was my own sort of ER training. I was good with about 80%, of the problems. But yeah, I would not encourage people to do that. But it did, as you say, I hadn't thought about that. It's really set me up because locums, you're going to a strange place. It functions differently than what you're familiar with. You may be the only one in your specialty, within a day's driving distance. And so you really have to be comfortable being resourceful. In fact, in my book, there's two arguments for people coming right out of residency and doing locums. And because I interviewed a bunch of locums doctors, what do you think about that? And about half of them said, "Oh, it's great. That way they can test out new places, small town, big town, corporate medicine, different clinical settings, clinics, hospitals." And then the other half said, no, 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 because, they don't really, they're still kind of wet behind the ears and there's nobody supervising and they may be on their own. So my conclusion is it really depends a lot, upon the graduating doctor, how confident they are, and how comfortable they are reaching out for help, and whether they feel like they need a few more years of supervision or they're all ready to go to an Indian reservation, and just wing it and learn. So there is probably a personality factor there as well as a quality of training.
hmm Yeah, I think there's lots of different reasons why you might pick up that clinical courage to go and be in the middle of nowhere and do amazing and interesting things. It's not for everybody. I certainly agree with that. And very much it could be personality, it could be level of training, comfort in asking for help, level of team um, member type personality too. Like, how well do you work with your teammates? Because they're not often going to be other doctors or clinicians. They're going to be nurses who've been there for a long time, or they might even be health aides rather than even a practicing nurse that you're actually working with on the front lines there. Yeah. So then you went into neurology, internal medicine, a bit of neurology, epilepsy. Did you then have a job for a while where you settled down for a bit?
Right. So again, so I finished my epilepsy fellowship in 1989. And in those days, your choices were sort of, I worked for a pharmaceutical company, which was frowned on by, all of the academics that had trained you, or I go into academics and write papers and get an appointment, or I go into private practice. And the academics that trained me were all pretty intense and most of them not too friendly. And it wasn't really a world that I saw working for me. I didn't want to be in a tiny, tiny research area. I wanted to do everything and learn everything. And epilepsy was a big need. That was the beginning of the comprehensive epilepsy center movement. There were just a few in the US, and there was a new one being formed, and that's where I was hired. It was a private practice that was developing an epilepsy program in conjunction with the neighboring hospital, and they needed someone who was an epileptologist. So it was a great first job for me to sort of be the epilepsy doctor, the first one in Western North Carolina. That was very, very exciting. And I did that for 8 years. And we did epilepsy surgery, we did pharmaceutical trials. I had a database. I made one with, it was some early Microsoft software where you could make a database with fields. 4,000 patients I accumulated who had seizures. And it was pretty exciting. But after about 8 years, I said, I think I want to do something different. I want to write more papers. Because I was always doing the same thing. And epilepsy is fascinating and interesting. But usually I could figure it out within a few minutes with a new patient. And then it was just a slog. I didn't have any helper. And I wrote a book at that time called Epilepsy 199 Answers, because patients tend to have the same questions. There was no internet or FAQ where you could. So I wrote basically an FAQ book. It's like, well, what's an EEG? And will I have to take medicines the rest of my life? And there's a lot of common questions. So I thought, well, read the book, then we can get to the sort of the next level of question. But the basic questions are pretty straightforward. So I tried academics at that time. So I thought, well, I need a fellow. We were starting to do 24-hour EEG monitoring. I could do more trials. I thought it would free me up. So I took an academic job that turned out to be a disaster. It was what they would now call a toxic work environment. I don't think we had that language then. So when I got there, I realized something wasn't right, and I did everything I could for about 6 months to try and fix it. And then I realized that they didn't want to fix it. They liked it the way, and so I quit. I was there 1 year. I had a very bad taste in my mouth from academics. I had always been a very academic private practice doctor. I published papers. I mean, I functioned as an academician, but within the outside of a university. So then I went off on my own and I did locum tenens. I worked as a medical journalist. If you go to medscape.com, you'll see literally hundreds of articles that I've written and many, many other sort of news sites. And I still do work for Medscape, interviews just like this and articles. I just wrote one about Oliver Sacks. That was fun for me. And that went on for about 10 years. And it was all good. Then I thought, but I started to kind of get distant from the epilepsy world in terms of doing drug trials, and I was really outside the system. So I thought it was time to get back inside the system. So I took a neurohospitalist concept was then invented. So I was the first neurohospitalist in New London, Connecticut. And that was really fun, sort of the week on, week off, pretty intense. But then I'd have my weeks off. Monday was a laundry day and a shopping day. Wait for the hangover of not getting enough sleep for a week to go away. And then I could write again. So that kind of work-life balance concept came to be. And then I continued to work locums. And then I discovered something that I had never imagined, that there were locum tenens jobs that were academic jobs. I remember I was in Minnesota, and they were orienting me. You show up and there was a woman there who you're never going to see again, but she's the one to show you around and get your badge. And anyway, the clock is ticking. My first day is 8 a.m. and the lady was late. And then we're going around here to get my badge, and we're getting parking and we're getting coffee. I was saying, the patients what's going on with the patients? I better get going. I'm going to be here till midnight. Let's go. Don't worry about it. So finally, it's like noon. I was in a panic. So you can go to work now. And there was a team. There was a team of students and residents who were seeing all the patients. It's like, wow, this is great. And then I had a similar job at the Mayo Clinic, where I was sort of guest faculty, if you were. I was a locum tenens physician, but I had a team. And it's like, this is really fun. And to try and compress the story a little bit, I decided to get a full-time job as an academician because I had continued publishing and so on. And after years of looked for 2 years, 2 solid years to find a job that suited my personality and that
Hmm.
suited my schedule and that was going to pay me enough. And those were sort of the big three. And what triggered that, I think it's important to say what triggered that. I had been single all this time and did whatever I
Hmm.
want. But if you know that when you're married, then you can't do whatever you want. So I got married for the first time and we were going to have a baby. And I thought, I don't want to be flying around everywhere, which is what I did. And I'd be gone for a week and come back and fly here, fly there. It was fun. I didn't mind. I could work on the plane. But I thought, gee, if
Hmm.
we're going to have a little kid, I'd like to be home. So I
Mm.
started this search, and I had very, very good job offers during that 2 years, but they weren't perfect. One paid a
Mm.
lot. It was on the coast where I wanted to live, but the clinical work was really boring. It was a community hospital and all the neuro consults were like dialysis patients who were confused. And there wasn't much academic challenge to the job. And then there was an academic job, but they wouldn't let me sort of do the outside work that I like to do, like Medscape interviews. And I earn a little
Mhm.
bit on the side, not much, but I just enjoy doing it. Then there were a couple other ones, a Kaiser job that was very good, but they wanted to do a lot of telemedicine. And I don't have any objection to that, but you can't do telemedicine at the same time you're rounding on patients. And they didn't seem to realize that. Oh, it's telemedicine. You just make a call and you do that in between. It's like, no, that's not going to work. But that was their thing. They saw and I was quite outspoken that the guy told me, he said, we would have hired you, but you made it clear you don't want to do this, and that's what the chief wants to do. So that job was out. And then finally, I stumbled on the job that I have now, where they wanted a relatively senior person because they needed to build up their department. They had a bunch of people leave, and they were willing to give me an every other week schedule, which is what I have now. And I would have the opportunity to do academics, but it wasn't a tenure track, so I didn't have to. And I would have students and residents. So, and of course, they paid a little less than everybody else, but it was tolerable.
Mhm.
So I figured I can make up the difference with, Medscape and some of the other things I do. And that was okay with them. They didn't care. Some of the other places wouldn't permit it, but they said, yeah, sure, whatever. And so now I'm starting my ninth year.
Mhm.
And while I've been here, I've also done some locums. There's a VA right down the street. And so I did some locum tenens at the VA on weekends. They needed someone and I needed the extra money and I thought it would be fun. And I like the VA scenario, patient care, it's okay. So that all worked out. So I guess the moral of the story is you kind of have to find, what works for you. And as your life changes, right? If you have three kids in school and, they all need braces and, you can't be flying here and flying there. Maybe that doesn't work for you. But if you're a little more independent or you're just starting out, or we talked earlier before we got online about winding up, pre-retirement, that's another section in my book. That's a really great way to sort of, it's hard to go from 60, 70 hours a week to nothing. And from the point of view of your identity and also income, right? It's like, whoop.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of reasons to say, well, I'd like to work 3 months a year, in Florida, during January. You can do that. You can do that. So that's another. So I'm not retired yet, but I keep my Florida license actually. I'm in I'm in Tennessee now, but I keep a few licenses. When I did locums full time, I had 10 because if you don't have a state license, you're not going to be number one on the list when that opening opens and they say, "Oh, are you licensed in Idaho?" And they go, "No." It's like, well, there is some other guy who's already licensed in Idaho, and if he wants it, he's going to get that job before you. So
Yeah.
it helps to have, a bunch of licenses and a good relationship if you're using a staffing agent, somebody who knows what you're looking for, knows what you want, so they call you first. Hey, Andrew,
Hmm.
you did a great job on that last assignment. This one just popped up today. So, that's the way to sort of succeed using a staffing agent. And of course, like my Mayo Clinic job, I just got that through the grapevine. Friend of mine knew that I was available and they needed somebody, and it was never publicized. So that's also important to be nice to people so they call you.
Tell me about flying into a new community, landing, and starting to make that locum successful. So, starting, how do you really kind of get up to speed with how things are done, understand the lay of the land, how you're going to proceed in your day, and not, bump into too many problems in regards to doing things your
Yeah,
way versus how they
right.
do things their
So,
way, that sort of thing.
that's intimidating. I mean, going to a new place for the first time, particularly if you're going to be busy. It's not like you're there on vacation, you'll wander around. So, one thing that I always did is I would go 2 days early.
Hmm.
Even if I had to pay those extra days in the hotel or wherever they were putting me up. And I would just go 2 days early and I would rent the car and park the car and I would drive to work. Where's the parking? How
Hmm.
long does it take? Drive during rush hour or the time that I would normally go in, make sure I had my badge, get all the bureaucracy stuff out of the way and just kind of get familiar with it because those things are taxing. It's just like giving a talk. You walk in, you want to get up on the stage before everyone comes in. Where are the lights? Where's the mic? How much room do I have? Just those little things, they take energy. So I would do that ahead of time. Make sure I had a hotel with a gym. I like to do that in the morning or when I come back, and just where am I going to do my laundry? All these sort of things so that, if you've got a 12-hour day taking care of patients, you come home tired, you don't have to start inventing things. Where am I going to get food? Is there a local restaurant near? I'm not much of a cook, so I would sort of rely on food that I could find or even eat in the hospital cafeteria. So that's one thing. The other main stumbling block to locums for new physicians is the electronic medical record, right? You
Hmm.
have to know how to use it. And so I always insist when I talk to staffing agent, okay, I'm going to go to South Dakota. What EMR do they use? Okay, they use Epic or they use Cerner. And if I don't know it, of course, after you do this for a while, you know them. But in the beginning, I say, I want to go a day early and they are going to train me and they're going to pay
Hmm.
me and they will. You demand it. You say, because you don't want to show up there and not know how to turn the thing on because you got work to do. You got consults, you may have 6 consults waiting for you, and then you don't know how to order, Dilantin because, all these systems are a little bit different. They're not hard to use once you know how to use them, but if you don't know how to use them, they can be impossible. And I wrote a story I had where I was in the middle of the night in the ER and I had to admit patients. I was usually a neurology's consultative service, but in this particular case, we had our own patients. Well, no one in the ER knew how to admit a patient, and get their medicines transferred. No one
Hmm.
knew. No one, because they don't do that. The nurses didn't know, the doctor, that's not something they do.
Yeah.
So I had to call IT, and an IT lady came at 2 in the morning so I could admit the patients who were then piling up. I was very stressed out. So
Mm.
get the EMR thing out of the way so you're comfortable, your templates, all that BS, get it done. And as I say, if you insist on it, they'll do it because it's a quality of care thing, right? It's not
Hmm.
and you should be paid. That's your time. So I'd go a couple days early, learn the EMR, maybe drive around town, as I said, for the restaurants, laundry, figure all that out. And I tend not to do much sightseeing. My work trips were work trips. If I didn't, a lot of people combine them, which I think is great. I don't know. I have like different mindsets. When I'm working, I'm working. When I'm not working, I'm not working. But I've tried that. I do a little tourism. I never really enjoyed it. I just wanted to either get home and go back, oh, that'd be a fun place to go on vacation, but doing
Hmm.
two. But that's something to consider also. If you have a family, you're going to drag them with you. If you're going to go for a few months at a time. I used to do week on, week off. So there was really no point bringing anyone, and there would be nothing for them to do because I usually had a 12-hour day and come home tired, eat a TV dinner, go to bed. So it wouldn't really be fun for, even if you brought your pet, it wouldn't be fun for them either. So, but also every situation is different. Ideally, you want to speak to the last locums doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So you can ask your staffing agent because most locum scenarios are recurrent and didn't just pop up out of the blue, although of course that happens, but it's likely that somebody else did it before you. So you can try and get the lowdown. How many new consults are there? Are there 6 a day or 12? I mean, it makes a huge difference. Am I going to be doing LPs or does radiology do them? Those are sort of neurology specific questions but then make a huge difference in the flow. Do I have a helper? Is there a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, or resident or am I just there? It's just me, and everything is me. Those are all really going to make a difference in terms of your experience. Locums companies tend to be pretty standard. They'll provide a place to live, they'll provide your car, they'll provide transportation to and from. Usually they don't pay for food because it's a given. Everybody has to eat, so you're going to eat whether you're on locums or not, so they don't cover that. And sometimes there's some wiggle room, for upgrades but I never had a bad experience with, hotels. It was always, I would also always ask for the hotel closest to the hospital because that's what you're there for. So when I was in Minnesota, I could walk. I walked to the hospital, which was great because they don't have ideal weather in Minnesota in the winter. So you didn't have to deal with, I had a rental car, it just stayed in the garage and I would walk back and forth. And in South Dakota, I had to drive. And I had no idea it could get so cold in South Dakota. I mean, minus Fahrenheit numbers. So I had to keep that in mind, budget some extra time to find your car and get the snow. You're probably familiar with that phenomenon where you are, and start it up and wear gloves and a hat so your ears don't freeze and fall off. But locums is fun because the other side of that, it's an adventure, right? You're meeting new people, you're going to a new place, but you are a guest. You're a guest in someone's home. I remember I went to the South Dakota one. There was another locums doctor there, and all he did was complain about how where he had what's that military hospital in Washington, Walter Reed. Oh, we did it this way, and it was so much better. We did it this way, and it was so much better. Well, they never asked this guy back. And he was perfectly capable, but his attitude was, I'm just doing this for the extra money. It was like, that's not what you want to do.
No one wants to hear that.
No, you want to, I felt, because I had been doing journalism, I said, this is a privilege for me to be here. Taking care of patients. Wow, not everybody gets to do that. This is fun. I'm excited. And, you want them to look at you as a bright light. And rather than, some grumpy doctor that they're stuck with because they're not stuck with you, they got rid of you. And I had at least 2 permanent job offers from my locums time where they said, gee, this guy really fits in. Maybe he'll stay. And in those particular cases, I almost stayed, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. But that's very flattering, right? That means you're doing the job. So that should be your goal. I want to do as good a job as I can. So they ask me to stay so I can say no. That's what I would recommend.
Do you think that's part of the professional personality of that ability to say, I'm going into somebody else's space to do a job? Because I know when I would go to a locum position, I would have the attitude of, I'm a newcomer. I need to rely on the team who are there. I'm here to do a job. I'm likely going to get flogged because that's my role, is to turn up and do what is required. And it's going to be long days, like you said, coming home, salad from the fridge or a TV dinner and then off to bed, and then you do it all again tomorrow. But that's what if you're coming with that intention and that team spirit of, this is your home and I'm here to help you out to see the patients and get this job done, is a different professional personality. you're kind of mirroring what the team already want and expect from their doctors. You're really there to help fit in and might be doing it slightly differently than how you normally do it. I'm trying really hard not to say, well, where I come from, we have a cath lab upstairs, and now I've got a 45-minute retrieval to get this person onto a helicopter to get them to the PCI lab, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one factor of that I wasn't expecting is that when you show up for a locums job, the other doctors are usually happy. I remember once I walked in and oh, Dr. Wilner, we're so glad you're here. And I was thinking, wow, they must know my reputation, because I'm published and my name's around. But then I realized it had nothing to do with that. They were overworked and they were just happy to see like a warm body there.
That's right.
No matter who I was, you know. It wasn't that personal. It was like, oh, you're here to help. And so that's a nice thing about locums. But you're absolutely right. You have to fit in to the system because you don't have a vote, right? You're not going to be on any committees. You're a temporary person. That's the other thing. It's kind of hard to make friends, as a locums doctor with the other doctors because they know you're going to be gone. So, they're not going to invite you to meet their family and have dinner because you're not settling in their community. You're just sort of passing through. No, I mean, you might have lunch with them and stuff like that, but they're not going to extend themselves because you're temporary. But the more that you can do to fit in. Oh, yeah. The other thing is, the reason you have a locums job there is because they have a problem. They have a problem. Somebody left. It's a crummy place to work. They're expanding and they're overworked. Somebody went on maternity leave and may or may not come back. They have a problem. And so I would always go expecting to find a work environment that was less than ideal and where I was going to have to work more than I wanted to. So worst case scenario. And if it wasn't that bad, and it usually never was, then I thought it was great because I was expecting the worst. Because you're temporary, you can put up with it. That's, you can see, all right, I'm only here for every other week for 3 months and then it's done. So, I mean, we've all been interns and residents. You can put up with anything for when you know that, there's an escape hatch. Plus, hopefully they're paying you pretty well to do it. So whether you like it or not, that's, if you do, that's a bonus, but you're there to work and get paid. And so that's kind of your reward. And you want to leave a good impression so that somebody will, that's the other thing. You do need recommendations in this world and to get another job. So, you want to impress them with your ability. I mean, being nice helps, but it also helps if you know what you're doing because it'll get around pretty quick. And the other way to make a good impression is to be responsive. They paid you, you answer. You don't want people to say, oh, I can never find that Dr. Wilner. That's terrible. You paid them, they want you. You are where you're supposed to be all the time. You answer, they know what you're doing. And you can tell them, hey, I was here at 8 this morning. Where were you? I mean, you in a nice way, but you want to make it clear that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. If the place is still falling apart, it's not your fault. And that helps a lot too, because then they can count on you and, you can't count on everybody. And sometimes the staff, oh, I've been here 10 years. This place sucks. They're not putting in 100%. So if you show up and you put in 100%, you're really going to stand out. And the staff knows you're leaving, so they don't really care. It's not like they're going to be jealous or anything. You're going to be, they'll even ask you, how long are you here? 3 months. Fine. And, so that's kind of it's a very privileged position.
Tell me about the handoff, like inboxes of things that you've ordered while you've been there. What does it look like to hand off that as you leave a place? That's something that was a shifting thing for me when I was doing locum. Some places it was an easy and they had a system. Other places it was very messy.
Well, the way I did it was today's my last day. Bye. And that was it. Somebody else had to just pick up where I left off. Tomorrow you're not paying me anymore. That is a beauty of locums. Every now and then I get some call about, some strange lab that, trickled in, but it was very rare. Once you're gone, you don't have privileges anymore, for one thing. Your
Mhm.
privileges end the day you leave. So there was no official handoffs or anything like that when I left. And I had inpatients, also outpatients. Somebody else would just have to pick up where I left off. That was part of the beauty of it. Nobody's calling you. You're done.
Mhm. Is there any way you prepared the coming person for that?
Nope.
Okay.
Because I didn't know who the coming person was, right?
Yeah. What
And
about the way you do like charting on notes? Was there anything about that that would help, that a way that you would structure it so that you
ah,
knew the person coming on would have an idea what to do?
well, I write very
Informational continuity.
comprehensive, very traditional, old-fashioned problem number one, boing, boing,
Hmm.
boing, do this, problem number two, boing. So
Hmm.
it would be very easy to pick up where I left off. It
Hmm.
was very deliberate. That's right. So yeah, I don't just leave a mess.
Worked in one locum and it was general practice. It was part of the job. And I sat down in this very teeny tiny small community, and the locum before me had been there for 6 months and wrote no notes. It was
Nice.
awful. It was so bad for the community and for me and for everyone. Obviously, it was not legal nor medico legally sound or all the things, but it was just such a terrible experience to come into that uh, locum position with that history. It's like, what am I going to do? So hard.
Yeah, I'd say something else is to be clear about your responsibilities because in this Minnesota job, it was great. I was an inpatient person. I switched later to outpatient, but I didn't do both at the same time. But one night I got a call from some clinic and, 100 miles away that, oh, you're the neurologist on call. I've got a case for you. It's like, whoa, wait a minute here. Is that my job? I had pharmacies calling me for, authorized refills in the middle of the night. It's like, wait a minute, nobody told me I'm going to be getting these calls because that would interrupt my sleep and mess up the next day. And I hadn't really budgeted for that. Plus, I wasn't getting paid for that. And it turned out that was my job, but nobody had told me. So that's a good question to ask is, apart from the clinic, will I be getting phone calls? Am I signing off on nurse practitioner notes?
Mm-hmm.
Because the scope of what doctors do now has been gradually expanding is to, and make sure you get paid for stuff. It's like, well, am I going to get paid for that? How do I get paid for that? And that's the time, once you're there, you have no negotiating leverage. But before you go, you can ask those questions. Now, if you're too much of a pain, they may take somebody else, right? There's always a risk that you'll lose that assignment. But you kind of have to sort of judge how desirable is that assignment. How many people want to go to Anchorage in January? Probably not too many. So you can probably ask a few questions without losing the job. If it's Florida in January, it might be more competitive. So, and your staffing agent, if you work with like Staff Care or Comp Health or one of the big agencies, they should have a feel for that. Oh, Dr. Wilner, we're so happy you're doing this. We can't find anybody else. They probably won't say it that way, but this is very competitive. You need to tell us within 24 hours or we have somebody else lined up. So that gives you also an idea on whether you can negotiate your rate. Because when I first started, I thought the rates were fixed. They offer, it's like going shopping. You go to Whole Foods and the raisins are $9. You figure you don't go and offer eight, right? I mean, but when they tell you you're going to get $127 an hour plus, overtime or whatever it is, you could say, well, I want 150 and see what they say. And the staffing agents love that because they get a piece of what you get. So the more you get, the more they get. So, but there's a ceiling. So if you're too greedy, you may end up with nothing.
Hmm.
But again, your staffing agent can kind of guide you. The experience I had, the staffing agent just said, "Well, I'll ask."
Hmm.
So she asked, and I got more. So it was like, "Oh, I'm glad I asked." You know.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. Tell us about your podcast and your book.
Great. Okay, so sticking with locums, I'm a writer, like we talked about. That's always what I've wanted to do. So I was looking for something to write about for my fourth book. And I thought, gee, I know a lot about locums. I've been doing this for a long time and ins and outs. And I searched Amazon. There was no books. There was a couple pamphlets. Nobody had written a comprehensive guide for the doctor who wants to do locum tenens. I thought, well, that'll be fun. So I wrote The Locum Life, a physician's guide to locum tenens. And it's still kind of the Bible, if you will, for doctors who want to do locum tenens. There's an audio book that I narrated, and there's paperback, there's hardback, and I still get royalties. I published it 6 years ago, and it still sells. Nobody has sort of one-upped it yet. It's really got all the things we've been talking about. There's 2 big chapters on credentialing, there all the stuff you need to know if you haven't done locums. It's a good intro. And even if you have, there's probably a few sort of tidbits there. And that was a lot of fun to write. And now, I still get asked to talk about locums. And as you can see, it's a topic I'm passionate about because, there's so many unhappy physicians out there. And many of them are looking to jump ship. And the opportunities are like, oh, I could work for pharma. I could work for insurance company, reviewing charts. I mean, some of those are so sad. And if you're a clinician at heart, I always recommend to doctors, before you walk away from the clinical world, try locums. And I've had several doctors tell me, Dr. Wilner, I was burnt out. It was horrible. I hated my job. So I started doing locums. And, and I work 9 months a year, and I love my medical work. I love medicine now. It was just doing, too much of a good thing, being sort of driven into the ground. But when you can do it also, locums on your own terms, right? I used to work about 7 months a year, locums, and I would travel and I did a bunch of other stuff, and that worked for me. And I didn't have big expenses, and it was fine. But when I did work, it's like, well, I picked this job. I'm going to put 100% into it, and then it'll be done. Psychologically, it's kind of invigorating to have that control over your job. So I always recommend locums for physicians who are thinking about leaving, because once you leave clinical medicine, you really burn a bridge. If you're out for 2 years, very hard to get. Even women who aren't leaving, but they have a baby or something else, they want to be out for a couple weeks, sail around the world, very hard to get hospital privileges again, and particularly for surgeons. And I encountered that personally because I was out gallivanting for a while, and it was very difficult to get back into clinical medicine. So keep that in mind, that if you're gone, even sometimes as short as a year, very difficult to get back in. And locums is a way you can work 2 weeks a year, and it resets the clock. And also you have a recommendation from whoever you work for. So I would highly recommend, even if you want to take a break, do a locums here and there. And it keeps you in the active sort of zone bureaucratically. So the other part, you see behind me, the art of medicine. I'm a big believer that, algorithms are great, but most of the time they don't really help that much. You already know that stuff. But your patient, for some reason, doesn't fit the algorithm because they're on anticoagulation, or they're on immunosuppressant drugs, or you don't really know what's wrong with them, but they don't fit the algorithm. And so the art of medicine has always been pretty important to me. And also I have a big interest in the humanities. So about 6 years ago, I started this podcast, and I'm very interested in interviewing physicians who are doing little different things like writing a novel. I have quite a few that I've interviewed doing that, or they're doing rare disease research or medical mission work, for years and years. And one guy spent years in Africa, with flying the plane, the plane that takes the doctors around. He wrote a book about it. So I usually interview people who've written a book about their experiences. I just interviewed a guy, he's not a doctor, but he used to weigh 367 pounds, and now he weighs 145. So he's kept it off for 17 years. So he has this whole weight loss thing going, and he has this philosophy about it wasn't bariatric and it wasn't medication. It was all lifestyle change and diet. So he was kind of an extreme character, but we had a fun talk. So The Art of Medicine comes out every 2 weeks, and it's on YouTube just like this. and it's also on your streamer, and it's a lot of fun. There's 155 episodes now. So if you scroll down, guarantee, and a lot of them have to do with locums, actually. No surprise. So I've got some locums doctors there, and we talk about, different experiences and ways to approach it. And one of the things that's happened with locums that I wrote the book because it was fun for me and it was something I knew about. But since then, I think it's 6 years, locums has exploded as an option because the misery level of doctors have gone up looking for alternatives. And I never really, I was sort of on the, crest of a wave that I didn't even know was there. I didn't write it because, there's going to be doctors buying this book. I just wrote it because I'll sell 1,000 copies and that'll be something fun to write. But it turns out that it's like a movement, locum tenens, which is sad. I've written about that too. It's the canary in the coal mine. The doctors are doing locums because I even talked to the guy that hired me. He goes, "Why does everybody want to do locums?" I was like, "Well, if you don't know, you should. You have to offer something better. Or why in the world would they take a permanent job if they're going to get paid more and have more freedom, without the hassle and the commitment of a permanent job?" I'm very happy with my position at the moment, although there's always room for improvement, but it's worked out pretty well for me. But I think locums is really a terrific option to consider. The last category I didn't mention, we have the recent grads, the pre-retirement, and then the people in the middle, mid-career, and usually their motivation is need to make more money, for the braces or the mortgage or, a trip to the Galapagos or something that's going to cost 30,000. And, it also gives you, every time I would work locums, I would come back and say, my job is pretty good. Sometimes you see that other places, it gives you a frame of reference. And I always found that my job was pretty good compared to where I was working locums, but that was okay because I was only going to be there short term. So that can be very helpful to sort of know what's on the other side without burning that bridge and then finding out. So it's a fun thing.
Yeah. It can also fit into lifestyle, like you said, like when you were single and there was no requirement to be at home, it worked well for you to be able to go around. My locum journey started because we wanted to go around Australia with the kids and when they were in grade 2 and grade 5. And so therefore we sold everything, just had the truck, the caravan, and away we went into the wild world of Australia and just picked up locums to pay for groceries and fuel as we went around.
That's spectacular. Yeah, I tried to talk my wife. A locums job showed up for neurology in New Zealand. So I presented that to her. She said no.
Well, that's what took us to Canada in the first place was, well, we've done Australia now. Now what? Where in the world should we go? Because we're essentially homeless with just a truck and a caravan. What do we go do? And they're like, "Oh, let's go to Canada." So off we went there for a locum as well.
Oh, wow. And what are you doing now?
So we were there. We actually ended up staying for 12 years. And now I have returned back to Australia, which is the country of origin, because the kids kind of finished all their high school and got off to university, finished all that, and then we're like, okay, let's head back to Oz.
Yes, I saw your phone number started with 61. And
Yes.
I think Philippines, where I spend a lot of time because my wife is from Philippines, I think it's 63. So that 61 caught my eye. And I said, So I don't know. It must be midnight for you or something, or 3 in the morning.
8 in the morning, easy.
Oh, okay, 8 in the morning.
It equates pretty well. But yeah, no, it's an interesting, even if it's temporary for a period of time, it was like this period of semi-retirement for me in that I got to do a lot more family time, but keep my finger in the clinical space, as you said, and put a little money in the bank to pay for things as we went around. So it worked well, but again, I think it really depends on your professional personality, your clinical courage, your ability to fit in with new spaces and really pick up your game and be prepared to be so heavily worked when you're there. And knowing that's kind of part of the duty of what you're doing, you're filling a space, like you said, it's a place that's down a doctor for a reason.
In real estate, they talk about the most important things are location, right? Location. Well, in locums, it's flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. Your assignments may get canceled at the last minute. That's the way the system works. That's happened to me. You're going to get dropped into a scenario that you don't know and you can't control. You have to, because a lot of doctors, frankly, that's not their personality to be easygoing and flexible. So, and mine isn't either, but I pretend to be flexible when I do locums. So, you really do have to do that or it will not work well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. Where can people find you if they're looking to learn more?
Probably best case, well, you can always check out the podcast. It's on your podcast player. But I have a website, my name, andrewwilner.com. And there's links to everything there. So andrewwilner.com, it'll bring you to the book, The Locum Life, and a lot of the other interesting things that I do.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, if you found this podcast episode helpful, I would encourage you to like and subscribe. Every time you do, you help a colleague or friend find our podcast and it can help them too. Don't forget to share it along with your friends. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget we have Charting Champions for physicians and Smarter Charting for nurse practitioners and other clinicians to help you get home with your work done. We are helping you create sustainable clinical medicine. Thanks for listening.